Welcome in. Right now, we are about to rank classical music composers. If you've not seen one of these before, the idea is really simple. I'm going to go through the composers on this list here and give them a letter grade. A, just like in school, A is a great grade. D, not so much. However, a little different than school, we also have the S tier. Kind of like when, you take a test and someone gets like an A, but it's 94%, and someone else gets 110% because it got extra credit. That's why we have the S tier. The S tier is only reserved for the best of the best. For the most part, I'm just going to be considering the composer's contribution to piano music because that's what I do. And on that note, I need to go through before we start here and take out some composers that didn't really do a lot for us as pianists. We're not going to need Fauré here. I respect the Renaissance and all, but Monteverdi's got to go. Same with Palestrina. Berlioz, it's not cool to try to kill people. And Bizet, it's not cool to write operas about trying to kill people either, even if the tune is really catchy. Mussorgsky are just a little too modest for my taste, and Purcell, you shouldn't have written so much choral music. Korsakov, Rossini, Berlioz, Strauss, Viva Verdi, but not here. Wagner, I can't have you on the list if I took off Verdi either. Oh, and Saint-Saëns, because I hate saying your name. Cue everyone who speaks French, leaving a comment down below hating me for what I just did to his name. I should probably take Dvorak off too because there's not a lot of solo piano music. All right, I think everyone else can stay. We are ready to jump into the tier list. First up here, we have Bach. Oh, Bach, easy S tier material just because he's the best Baroque composer. So it's hard to be the best guy in an entire era and then not earn yourself an S tier. My favorite story to tell by Bach by far is not the fact that he had like 20 kids and wrote more music than you can ever imagine, but one time he wanted to take a new job. And he lived back in the old day where there were like princes and dukes and counts and kings, and you had to appease these people. And the leader of his land found out that he wanted to leave and threw him in prison so he couldn't take a new job. So be thankful he didn't live in the 1700s. Let's skip ahead a little bit and go to Ravel. Ravel is a French composer, as you can tell from the photograph, much more modern composer than Bach. Kind of lived in the post-impressionistic era. And even though he has a great killer piano piece, Gaspard, one of the most difficult pieces ever written, but also a really great piece, and also a really, really good piano concerto, his overall output for the piano isn't super high, so it definitely doesn't justify S tier, even though those two pieces are really cool. Probably not A. He has a few other water pieces that are fine, but for me, this is my tier list. I almost want to do C. You know what? The piano concerto and Gaspard takes it to B. Let's give him a solid B. Up next here is another kind of middling composer for me, Mendelssohn. Kind of like Ravel, he has a killer piano concerto. Mendelssohn also has the Songs Without Words, which some people really like. They're often kind of put out there like, hey, these are great intermediate pieces and really beautiful musical pieces if you're intermediate, not ready for advanced music yet. And what I found is not a lot of them are as easy as I want them to be. So they're difficult enough that I'd rather just play better music. And I just don't like lots of them. Unfortunately, I'm just not a big fan of the Songs Without Words. The more I think about it, this is a really strong list of composers. This is like the top 20-something piano composers in existence. So we might need to drop Mendelssohn to a C tier. Oh, someone's going to have to be C tier. We can't make a whole list of S and A tier. So he's a really interesting guy, though. Look up Mendelssohn paintings. He was actually like very skilled in many areas of the arts. I think he even did some writing too. But just Google Mendelssohn paintings. You'll see actual paintings and be like, wow, he's a much better composer or painter than I'll ever be. However, for his piano music, I think we're going to give him a C tier. I might revisit that later, though. All right, let's get back and do a few more in order here. So we got Bartók. Bartók is a really interesting composer. He's one of our first musicologists. Like, he actually had this idea that doesn't seem crazy to us now, but back then was like fairly revolutionary. Like, he wanted to go around and catalog music. Like, he studied music of like tribes that he could find and people that lived in Eastern Europe. He would go around, like, listen to native people's music and try to like implement that into his own music. And again, that doesn't seem that shocking to us today, but the fact that he kind of had this idea that would be something we should preserve. We should try to preserve these people's like songs and their music. Like, I don't know if you traveled much outside of Europe. I think he did in Eastern Europe as far as I'm aware, but kind of an interesting guy. I want to like him. I want to put him in an S tier just because I like some of his pieces so well, But when I really start thinking about it, I'm like, okay, there's a couple piano pieces I like really well. There's a few pieces I hate. He's sort of in the era of extreme experimentation. He has some really weird pieces I just think are atrocious. All in all, there's probably a handful of things I really like. So I'm really between B and A tier on Bartok. He's a cool guy, which I kind of want to bump him up to being an A tier just because he seems, well, I actually don't know if he's a cool guy. He could have been a horrible human being, but from what I know about him, he seems like a pretty cool guy. So let's give him an A tier. All right, up next, let's do Messiaen. Man, I hate this guy's music. I'm missing something. There's something I don't get, and I admit it's probably me. His music just seems like chaos to me. I'm kind of including his organ music in this as well, since that's kind of like a keyboard work. I don't know what there is to like about it. People seem to just connect with something, and I don't connect with it at all. So he's going to be our first D tier. Sorry, Messiaen lovers. Actually, I'm not really that sorry because, I mean, do any of you really like his music? Come on. Come on. Okay, let's not put it off any longer. Up next, we have Beethoven. I'm just going to go ahead and stick him in the S tier. If you've watched my channel before, I mean, does Beethoven need explanation even from me? He's the GOAT. He's the greatest composer there ever was. Greatest of all time. I mean, he's Beethoven. Like, he writes some of the most beautiful music. He writes the most dramatic music. Like, it goes, the way it develops. He writes some of the best textures. He's as a piano player, he's such an innovator of, like, textures and piano technique. I mean, he's just the unquestioned, I think, in my opinion, unquestioned greatest of all time. But even if you disagree with me, he's pretty much in everyone's top 3 to 5 composers. So Beethoven is awesome, easy S tier stuff. I mean, I could go on, one piece after another. And not only does he have some of the best pieces, but he has so many of those pieces. It's not like he has 4 or 5. I mean, some of these guys I'm putting in here are like, okay, there's 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces I like. I mean, Beethoven, the list just goes on and on. I have hours upon hours upon hours of Beethoven music to listen to, and then like a lifetime of music to study if you like want to play it yourself. So Beethoven, easy S tier. In fact, can I swap him and put him first? I can. Okay, we'll just make him the very first S tier because he's the GOAT. All right, let's skip ahead to Debussy here. This list has a lot of French composers and a lot of more modern composers, which is kind of interesting. But Debussy, obviously famous for the preludes. There's a lot of preludes, but it's not just that. He has a lot of other standalone and also some sets of piano music. Some of it's really good. I'm not the biggest Debussy fan. I kind of made fun of Messiaen earlier and was like, none of you out there are going to care, but Debussy, some of you are going to care. However, he's not like Messiaen. I don't actively dislike his music. I do like it. I just know that I'm putting him up against people like Beethoven and Bach and Chopin and Brahms later. And again, if I just put every composer that I liked in an S tier, this whole list is going to be full of S tiers, and we're going to have none of the other tiers filled out. So I have to keep that in mind. And I'm going to drop Ravel down. I can't put Debussy at B and then keep Ravel right there with him. Ravel's definitely below Debussy. So, yeah, but Debussy can't be an A, I don't think. So he's a B for me. If you get a B in a class, that's pretty good. That's 85%. So I think I do respect Debussy. Maybe not as a person, but what he did for music, the way he was so innovative in everything, piano technique, key areas, like the way he approached rhythm. He's such a cool composer. I just don't personally love a large quantity of his music. So that is the first one that you all can hate on me for, because I know I'm not in the majority there. Clair de Lune is awesome. So the only reason you like Debussy, if you're one of those people who are like, Ryan, how dare you? How dare you pick on Debussy? He's the best ever. And you've only heard one of his pieces. We don't have a problem with each other. I think Clair de Lune is awesome too. But I know some people just adore all of his music, and it's just not so much for me. However, Johannes Brahms is totally my kind of music. Johannes Brahms is awesome. He wrote, you know what? If I'm only counting the piano music and like concertos, and I'm not counting his orchestral music, he's kind of on the line. He could almost be an A tier. He's like right there. Like, I'm going to leave him an S for right now, but he is kind of like, if you don't know much about Brahms, in a sense, like the second coming of Beethoven. He was born a few years after Beethoven died. He had this like big pianistic style, also kind of musically followed I don't want to say similar arc as Beethoven because Beethoven put out more orchestral music earlier on. But as far as like they kind of came onto the scene, just great piano players, and then ended up being these amazing orchestrators as well. Like Beethoven, a great piano player, but then he became this great, like his orchestral stuff and his concertos are so good. Brahms is similar. He's like a very much a young person, just a famous, amazing, great piano player, but he ends up writing some great orchestral stuff. So, man, Brahms is the best. And he looks like Santa Claus. I mean, if you want to teach your kids that Santa Claus isn't real, whatever, but he is because check out Brahms. Let's go to Grieg next. I kind of view Grieg as my composer. He's not. It's not like I discovered him or anything. I mean, he's dead well before I was born, and I did not discover him. But I think I like him more than average. I think a lot of people just kind of view Grieg as like maybe this middling BC tier. I really like his music. Like most things I hear by Grieg, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Now, there's not a ton of piano music, so it's hard to compare him with someone like Brahms or Beethoven or Bach, where you just have hours upon hours upon hours, hundreds of pages of music. So sometimes it's a tough comparison. I can't put him in S tier for that reason, just because his output wasn't that high. But he has some really cool pieces. His piano concerto is great. Actually, I'm going to forget which one it is, but I'll try to look it up and if I remember and put it on the screen. But one of his violin sonatas, the violin piano sonatas, killer piece. It sounds something like. So it makes him so interesting as he kind of lived in this very late romantic era where harmony has advanced to the point where so many chords are on the table, so many chords are acceptable to them, so he can just like experiment to these extremes with the harmony. But he doesn't do it just like some late romantic composers do extreme harmony by just stacking so much stuff and everything so thick together. But he does a lot of just like interesting chords or places you don't expect the music to go to. Or I could go on and on about him, but he is great. Let's jump now to another old composer. We have Handel here. Handel was actually born the exact same year as Bach. However, if I'm judging Handel just by his piano output, I'm going to make some people mad, but it's close to a D tier. I'm going to say C. Let me think about it. Handel is a cool composer. Messiah is a great piece, not just for the part we all know, but the whole piece is just epic thing. Like there's so much text painting, so many cool things going on, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about his piano music. He has a really cool sarabande. He has a cool bourrée, but those are more pieces that I teach to intermediate students, so I'm happy they exist for intermediate students. The harmonious blacksmith is pretty sick, but that's like one thing. I'm not saying he didn't write more, but one thing I like. So it's hard. I'm not going to give him a D tier. I think D tier would be like, I don't even like the few things you did, but he didn't do that much. So he's going to be down the C tier. Sorry, Handel. Oh, great story about Handel. So he lived at the same time as Bach, where you kind of had to kiss up to your local ruler, whoever it was, a prince or a duke or baron, whatever it was. And he actually asked this guy named Prince George. You've never heard of Prince George because it's not important, right? He asked Prince George, hey, can I go to London for a while? I kind of want to perform some of these pieces and spread the fame of a composer who lives in your region. I want to spread your fame throughout England. So the guy was like, oh, yes, of course, go. I mean, we didn't care about him much anyway. So he goes to London. And he just doesn't return. He just stays in London and just like, he does, well, haha, you're way over there. I mean, it literally doesn't matter. Like, what are you going to do about it? This guy became King George of England because of weird succession laws that happened in Europe at the time. He became the King of England. He was cool with it. He didn't seem to hold a grudge about it. But yeah, like Handel skipped town and like tricked his prince at the time in his Germanic country, and then the guy became the King of England and followed him to England. It's great, but it all worked out. He wasn't killed. Up next, let's do some Haydn. Haydn is a really, really, really interesting composer. He's super innovative and creative, but he's also very old. So keep in mind, when you listen to Haydn's music, you're not going to feel a strong amount of innovation, because if you're used to Beethoven, he was born quite a few years, 30 something years before Beethoven was born, I believe. And so his music isn't going to feel innovative because we might compare it to other classical composers. But Haydn lived like before then. He also lived all the way to 1810. So he lived a really long time, has a very long kind of life of output. So he's apparently a really funny dude. There's some fun stories. Look at Haydn. Look at stories about Haydn's nose or stuff like that. He's a pretty funny dude. I can't put him in S tier, but he definitely deserves A tier. Poulenc. We're back to another more impressionistic French composer, which this list is full of. And look, I'm going to tell you a story about myself. I've only once completely frozen up while performing and couldn't go on. Like I've of course stumbled. I've been performing and I can't find the next note. I kind of have to jump back or skip forward. It happens to all of us. But one time in my life, I literally just stopped and I couldn't think of the next note. I couldn't think of any of the next notes in the next page. And I literally couldn't go on. And then it happened again with the same piece. It was written by this jerk right here. So he gets a D tier. I'm not saying his music is bad, but I'm kind of saying his music is bad. Let's jump to Rameau next. Rameau is our last like old composer on the list, like old before obviously Mozart hasn't been dealt with yet, but before Mozart's time. And Rameau is interesting. I like that he has a lot of unique pieces for the piano. Like he did a lot of kind of unique I don't want to call them character pieces, but he actually gave pieces titles. Like back in that day, they were like Prelude 1, Prelude 2, Prelude 3, Prelude 4. And Rameau actually gave pieces signs like unique titles, like unique topics. They could be about something. I actually really like some of them. I think they're pretty charming. There's a lot I don't like, so I'm just going to put him right in the middle. B tier, hanging out with another Frenchman there, Debussy. Oh man, it's getting really late and starting to ice outside. So, I mean, I'm in my house. It's not like I'm a hero for doing a tier list when it's icing outside. I just hope the power doesn't go out and I lose stuff. But yeah, let's keep going. Let's jump to Schubert next. Schubert is a contemporary of Beethoven. He's kind of thought of as a romantic, but he's fairly early on the romantic. Like he died in 1829, almost 1827. I think he died in 1829 or 1830. Lots of the romantic composers we know, like Chopin and Liszt and Mendelssohn, many of them were born around 1810. So when they were only like 19, 20 years old, Schubert has now died. So he's kind of precedes lots of the romantic composers, kind of like Beethoven though, sort of transitional figure from the classical era into the romantic era. He has some great piano music. Probably my favorite piano piece by Schubert. Oh, it's hard to pick one. There is the big B-flat sonata, which is killer. Also, the F minor piano duo. So there's four hands. Two people can play on one piano together. It's called Fantasy in F minor for four hands. That piece is also great. If you don't know these pieces, if you don't know anything about Schubert, typically Schubert's pieces are too long for their own good, but some of them kind of like really hit the spot. He thinks of some really clever creative key changes, seems some really cool places to go. The main drawback of Schubert is always that he does something that's really cool, then he does it again, then he does it again. You're kind of sick of it by the end, but I really do like him. So he's actually a tough one. I'm really torn between A and B here. Since I gave Bartók the A tier, I'm going to give Schubert the A tier as well. Okay, so Prokofiev is an interesting dude that I will honestly admit I don't know enough of his pieces. I mean, I've heard the piano concertos. I don't think I've even heard all of his sonatas before. So he's a difficult one to rank for me. I do think the first time I heard one was piano concertos, I remember like my mind was just blown. Like this girl just started playing and she didn't stop. It was like nonstop energy. And I was just thinking, when is this going to end? Like it's just nonstop, huge amounts of energies. I've messed around a little bit with one of his etudes that was really cool. Something like that. I thought it was pretty cool. So I'll just give him a B tier. If I got to know his music better, it might go up, but I just don't feel like I can't give him an A tier with not knowing his music better. But I also feel like I've liked some of what I've heard, not everything. So I don't really want to give him a low rating either. So I'll just stick him in there with the French people and the B's. All right, up next, let's do Schumann. Schumann is a really interesting dude that had this crazy idea that, okay, there are people in the early romantic era, people are starting to like do concertizing musicians. They're going around and they're giving tours, they're giving concerts. And he had this great idea that rather than, he is a great pianist. He was really good at music. He wrote some great piano pieces, but he also wrote a newspaper where he would talk about the performances in the newspaper. And he did it in a really unique way where he'd have characters in his story. So someone would come in and be like, "Oh, I'm so sad. The music was so sad last night at that concert." And these characters would interact. Super creative guy. In a sense, he was kind of like the original YouTuber. Like, he didn't make it just on his piano playing, but he made it commenting on other people's piano playing, which is what lots of YouTubers do. They don't actually have to be good at what they do. They just have to comment on people who are good at what they do. Really cool guy, kind of had a vision for the future of not just the playing that's interesting, not just that aspect of music, but people would want to read newspaper articles about these people, like newspaper articles with commentary about that. He had kind of that vision for what could come of the playing in the concert. So a really cool guy. He also has great pieces. I mean, the piano concerto is great. There's there's so many different good sets of music. I'm going to give him an A tier. I thought coming into this he was going to be a B because, again, I love his music, but not everyone can be an A. Not everyone can be an A tier. But the more I think about it, he has a lot of pieces I really like, and he actually has Album for the Young written for intermediate students, like upper intermediate students. There's some great stuff in there that I use in my teaching. So yeah, let's give Schumann A tier. He also went crazy, by the way. And he also has his wife was great at piano, and she was a killer pianist. That even after Schumann passed away, she continued to play some of his music and promote it kind of throughout Europe. And she was known kind of as one of the best, or maybe the best pianist in the world at the time, only rivaled by probably Alcon, but on the list here, only rivaled by Liszt. So Liszt is the other person that lived at the same time as Clara Schumann, who is on the list here, and his name is Liszt. That got really confusing there for a second, but Liszt was also a great piano player and wrote tons of piano music. He's kind of like contemporary of Chopin in a sense of like both of them were just these people who put most of their output into the piano, and he wrote probably the hardest sounding music. If you hear Liszt, you're going to think the person playing Liszt is the best piano player you've ever heard in your life. Liszt wrote such impressive stuff. He said what he said. Now we think he's telling the truth, but what he said was he heard what's that guy's name? Paganini. When he heard Paganini play violin, he was like, I want to be that on the piano. I want to blow people's mind like you're just doing on the violin, crazy virtuosity. I want to do that on the piano. And supposedly, he went to practicing 6 hours a day on just scales and arpeggios and like technical exercises, which is crazy. He quickly became the best pianist, again, kind of maybe tied with Clara Schumann, but the most successful touring pianist. He was literally the original Beatles or the original Taylor Swift or whatever person, Justin Bieber, that went so crazy popular for a while. People are literally like kissing the ground behind their feet as they walk. He was the like original one of those guys. People went crazy. They lost their minds. Actually, German psychologists wrote these books about like, why do people pass out when they're around Liszt? That doesn't even make sense. This is a very old man picture of him right here. You can't quite see his stunning good looks in this picture, but he's a very interesting dude. He was so good at concertizing. He made concerts dramatic. He made them the way they are today. He would actually memorize his music, go up on stage, memorize instead of like, playing with sheet music. He would dramatically come out of the side of the stage. He wanted to turn the piano sideways. We used to actually sit with our butts facing the audience. Not me, but like people a couple hundred years ago. And Liszt was like, I want to turn the piano so people can see my face, my beautiful profile. But also it makes you feel like you're more engaged with the audience, like they're right there instead of you facing away from them. Crazy good composer. He actually became a monk when he was older too, which is really random that he had this crazy wild musician life when he was younger and then kind of gave up his wealth and became a monk. So I really like Liszt. I'm going to give him an A tier. I'm realizing my A tier is probably going to have too many composers in it because I like lots of these composers, but I really want to reserve the S tier for the best of the best. So yeah, Liszt A tier. I feel pretty good about that. I realized I just ranted on how great the guy was for 4 minutes. And if you are a huge Liszt fan, I'm sorry, because then I dropped the fact that he's an A tier at the end there. But again, this list is like the best of the best, so I can't give everyone an S tier. So A is still really good. He's definitely the strongest of all the A tiers, except maybe Haydn for me. So these other guys are definitely worse A tiers right now than Liszt. He is the top candidate for being promoted to S tier right now. All right, let's jump to Erik Satie. And Satie is a really interesting guy. People really like his one piece I'll put the name on the screen here, but they love this piece, and I really don't. I, in fact, have never heard a piece by Satie that I like for the piano. So I'm just going to put him down here in the D tier and apologize if it's your favorite composer. Sorry. We're actually down to just 4 more composers because Stravinsky here to the end is actually composers who didn't have a huge piano output, so I'm not going to rank them. So we're down to Schoenberg, Rachmaninoff, Mozart, and Chopin. Oh, who should I do first? Let's do Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff is killer. He's an S tier, easy S tier. The most unique thing about Rachmaninoff, most unique thing to me at least, is that he feels like the extension of someone like Chopin, but more romantic and maybe a little more harmonically advanced. I hate to say the word advanced because advanced implies that it's better, but things have moved along further. The interesting thing is that from the time Chopin died to the time Rachmaninoff died is nearly 100 years. Rachmaninoff was still alive in the 1940s. It's just hard to wrap your mind around that because lots of the composers in the 20th century during the time of Rachmaninoff were way away from tonal music, from music that sounds and they were experimenting with all sorts of stuff. It was kind of this big scientific revolution. People were experimenting with garbage. Actually, we'll talk about some of it in just a second here, but just some garbage music, sometimes it's not all garbage, but some of it where they're really trying to experiment, trying to break new ground in music where it's becoming a little, again, more scientific, analytical science. There was an element of randomness in music where people want to make what's called serial music, where they maybe roll dice or they have someone, you flip a card and that card determines your next note. All these experiments. And Rachmaninoff, for the most part, there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, Rachmaninoff just stuck with writing killer piano music. His music is so dark, it's so beautiful, and yeah, I mean, he's probably slightly below Beethoven, Bach, and Brahms, but still easy S tier. I don't even know if he's below those guys. His piano concerto is a top 5 piece for me, I believe. Easily in the top 10, but his second piano concerto is killer. Now, before we go on, I just want to remind everyone that I'm ranking these composers relative to each other. Like, I'm taking about 20 or so composers for well over 200 years of music. That's like less than a composer every 10 years. So yeah, if we were to take a list of 500 composers, most of these guys would make it into the S or the A tier. Not all of them, not Messiaen, he sucks. But most of the rest of them would be like S or A tier, like pretty easily. So I'm ranking them relative to each other. That's really important to you to understand because I'm about to give Mozart not an S tier. And he's not even the strongest of the A tiers, believe it or not, at least for me. Mozart is good. I love Mozart's music. I absolutely love Mozart's music. I can listen to a lot of it. I really actually like playing it. Probably more than I like listening to it to a certain degree. I think there's a lot of creativity, a lot of charm, and a lot of just enjoyment to playing his music. But I just don't enjoy listening to it as much as Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Rachmaninoff. I don't even enjoy playing it as much as those guys. I just get more satisfaction if I want to play a classical composer out of playing Beethoven and listening out of listening and teaching Beethoven. I just like the added level drama that happened in, the 10, 20, 30 years of development Beethoven had because he didn't live that much longer than Mozart. He did live quite a bit longer than Mozart, but the fact that he was born a little later and then lived a little longer, music had just developed to a more maybe romantic state would be the easiest way to say it. So Mozart's great. Mozart's really, really good. He's A tier. I'm not doing anything offensive like C tier. If I did that, my subscribers are probably like cut in half tomorrow. But I just can't put him in the S tier. I know it's going to probably rub some people the wrong way. I love him, but I'm trying to rank him relative to the other composers. So A tier for Mozart. Okay, Frédéric Chopin, the great Polish composer, another easy S tier. Chopin is one of my favorite composers. He has a lot of things going for him. Not only does he write some amazing virtuosic piano music that's just impressive, he also writes some of the most beautiful piano music. He also has Nocturne, which is a set of pieces that some of them are kind of approachable by not early, but late intermediate students, early advanced. So some things that are slightly more approachable for early advanced students. And then also he just is like the piano guy. Like Beethoven wrote tons of piano music. Bach probably wrote the most. But Brahms, tons of piano music. But Chopin didn't delve too much into other genres. It's mostly piano. There's some symphonic works. There's some piano sonatas, like the piano and cello sonata. But like, I would almost venture to say 95% of his music, I haven't actually added up, is piano music. There's like tons of nocturnes, and there's the ballades, and there's the scherzos, and there's the mazurkas, and there's the polonaises, and the waltzes, and the, I'm missing stuff. Oh, the etudes. Of course, the etudes and the preludes. I mean, like so much piano music. So he's kind of our guy's piano player, and it's totally justified. He wrote great music, and you can tell from the tier list, I do prefer Chopin to Liszt. I think I prefer Chopin slightly. I think there's a little more substance to Chopin. However, they're both great composers. I mean, they're both in the top 2 tiers. And I guess I saved Schoenberg for last. Schoenberg, okay, I like science. I really do like science. Like I can get into reading articles about scientific topics for a really long time, but it's not music, and so neither is Schoenberg. Okay, looking at the tier list at the end, I'm pretty happy with my ranking, except I don't like how many A tiers I have. I really do want to balance this out, so just not everyone. Like, I don't want everyone to be a winner. So I'm going to take my weakest A tier, or maybe my weakest 2 A tiers, and drop it down to a B tier. The first one to go was probably Bartók, because Bartók was an early person on this list, and I was like, I do love a few of his pieces, but probably not enough pieces I love by him to deserve an A tier. And while we're at it, I really want to drop Schubert or Grieg. I just can't decide who I like slightly more. Oh man, I'm going to drop Schubert down. I think I like Grieg. I prefer Grieg slightly more. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and put Mozart in the D tier. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Mozart stays in the A tier. Take a deep breath, everyone. Okay, I feel much better about that. There at the bottom, we have terrible composers like Messiaen, Poulenc, because he caused me to freeze up one time, Satie, who didn't do anything that important, but some people like his one piece for some reason, and Schoenberg, who wrote just garbage. C tier, we have Mendelssohn. It feels so wrong to put Mendelssohn and Handel in the C tier. I feel like I've committed a crime against music. Oh, it's so wrong. I can't believe Handel's C in here in the C tier, but I'm trying to compare their piano output to other composers, and I think it's deserved. Handel in the C tier. Oh, it's so bad. Okay, B tier, Debussy, mostly on the strength of a couple things like the Estamps and the Preludes and the Isle of Joy, I think is what it's called. A couple really good piano pieces I like, but it's well deserved. Rameau, who, you know what? Let's pop Rameau down here. We're going to have Rameau hang out with Handel. They have similar hair, so they can be buddies down here. So there we go. Things are getting pretty balanced here. Prokofiev, again, I think I told you I put him in the B tier because I don't know much about his music. I don't know enough. I have heard a lot of his music, but not enough to feel like I can give him a really high or low ranking. Bartók, already said. Cool. Schubert, great composer. And now we're just great composers. Grieg, on the strength of his beautiful melodies. Haydn, just for the fun nature of it, like playing some earlier classical fun stuff. Schumann, such a creative, melodic guy. Liszt for the impressiveness and beauty of his music. And Mozart, Mozart writes great music. I know you feel like I probably hate him because I didn't put him in the A tier or S tier, but he writes great music. And then here at the top, we round stuff off with just the greatest composers. Chopin, killer, beautiful composer. Rachmaninoff, absolutely some of the most beautiful music you will ever experience in your life. Brahms, you gotta give to Santa Claus. He's amazing. And then Bach and Beethoven are just the two greats. Beethoven is the best, but Bach writes some of the coolest music you've ever seen in your life. And that is my tier list. It was just kind of a marathon to film tonight, but it's not too bad. I'm going to go see how bad the ice is outside now. If you would just take a second, let me know down in the comments how much you agree with this list, anyone that you would do wildly different. I'm sure some of you have really strong opinions, and that's okay because honestly, that's what we love so much about music. Sometimes I pick on people for having overly strong opinions in the comments, but we're here I love Beethoven. If someone said Beethoven was trash, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Beethoven's the best. So that's what we're here for. We love music. We love some classical music. So hopefully you enjoyed the tier list. Hopefully, even more so than enjoying the tier list, hopefully you heard some cool stories. I taught you a few things about the composer. And what I really want you to do now is, you can watch another one of my videos if you want to, but also just take a few minutes to research some stuff. Say, oh, that's a cool composer. I never heard of her. That's an interesting story. Hopefully you just sparked a little interest in your mind about the lives of some of these composers and you're interested to go check it out. So do that. And I'll see you guys in the next video.